Hey everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about the movements of thought and attention. And these are very much related to the question of movement of our bodies as well. So the reason for putting all of these together is because this is also the title of the Expand Your World class series in January. So you're definitely invited. There'll be information below the video about that. But by way of going through what we're going to be doing in the class series, I just hope to invite for you a little bit of inquiry into the relationship between your thinking and your movement and many other things. So let's just jump into what we're doing in the very first class. And the Expand Your World class always involves both awareness through movement as well as discussion, which uses as its jumping off point the thoughts of some important thinkers on the subject, this time the subject being thought. So people who've thought about thought and had something useful to say. So let's take a look at our inspiration for the first class on January 5th. So the first class is going to be about agreement, disagreement, and cross motivation. And the first quotation comes from David Bohm. This comes from the book On Dialogue, which I just want to take a moment to highlight. I think this is an incredibly important book, especially in our world today. It's just about the necessity for people to learn how to talk to each other and how difficult that has become. But there's many, many layers to it. I really urge you to get this book and study it. But the quotation reads, "Necessity creates powerful impulses. Once you feel that something is necessary, it creates an impulse to do it or not to do it, whatever it may be. It may be very strong and you feel compelled, propelled. Necessity is one of the most powerful forces. It overrides all the instincts eventually." And so in this class, agreement and disagreement are the example of the necessity that we're going to be looking at. Someone says something and you just instantly feel that you agree or maybe that you disagree. And so that's not just a mental thing, that's a sort of a readiness that shows up in the body. It might be the nodding of the head, right? Or the shaking of the head. And in your body, if you want to think about it in terms of biomechanics, well, shaking, or rather nodding the head like this up and down, that's the pattern we call flexion and extension in the spine. And then to go left and right creates a rotation pattern. So already we can see how a thought translates into an action of a specific kind. Now that's just one way that it could translate into the body, but that's one of the things that we'll be looking at in this class. And our second quotation related to this comes from Heinrich Jacobi. "We must learn to be more sensitized to our own condition and become so quiet that we consciously sense what an authority within us counsels us to do. By really becoming quieter, we make contact with this reliable inner self that will never let us down." So that second quotation from Jacobi about quieting ourselves, he doesn't say it, but part of quieting ourselves is often also slowing ourselves down, right? So when we're presented with the stimulus, boom, we might have an impulsive response, which is what David Bohm was talking about. But in that book On Dialogue, when he's talking about what do people need to do in order to be able to relate to each other better, one of the things he also talks about is the need to suspend some of our beliefs that we have already about the world or about whatever the subject is that we're discussing, so that we can actually slow down long enough to hear another point of view. It doesn't mean necessarily that we agree or disagree, but that sort of predetermined agreement or disagreement that we have, it's like, boom, it's right there right away. So Jacobi in his quotation, is pointing to something that we can do to come to a place of listening deeper. And then again, he talks about there will be an inner authority. Some people just call it like a gut feeling that we can contact. But this second class, it's called agreement, disagreement, and cross motivation, because that's when we're not sure if we agree or disagree, or part of us agrees and part of us disagrees. And this can happen in the body too. We don't know if we want to go like this or go like this. And there's a way that we're giving our body conflicting signals. We're trying to invoke more than one pattern of action at the same time, and we end up fighting ourselves. We end up shearing in the joints. We end up invoking unnecessary muscular effort, holding the breath, and all of these things. So this is all kind of wrapped together in a picture, and hopefully by talking about the first class, you can also see the larger theme here of how our thinking and our movement are very much woven together. And so in a sense, if we want to improve our movement, if we want to improve our thinking, these projects are also woven together. Okay, so let's talk about our second class on January 12th, which is called Pathways of Thought. The delicate tremble of a butterfly's wings in my hand, the soft petals of violets curling in the cool folds of their leaves or lifting sweetly out of the meadow grass, the clear, firm outline of face and limb, the smooth arch of the horse's neck and the velvety touch of his nose. All these and 1,000 resultant combinations, which take shape in my mind, constitute my world. Helen Keller. So of course, we all know that Helen Keller could not hear or see, but this amazing woman was able to really build for herself a whole sense of the world, primarily through touch. And her writing is just beautiful. It's all like this kind of poetic imagery. But as she describes all of these incoming sensations, I think the key line for our purposes here is the 1,000 resultant combinations, right? So when we encounter the world, there's so much to encounter. And how do we put it all together? So let's look at the second quotation here. So the second quotation for this class comes from John Russin, and it comes from his book, Bearing Witness to Epiphany, Persons, Things, and the Nature of Erotic Life. And he says, all our experience evinces something like the flow of a melody. All we experience picks up on themes that we're already developing and takes them in new directions, for fulfilling certain anticipations while launching new ones. So Russin helps us to build on what Helen Keller already showed about all the different possible combinations of how we could put together meaning from the world. And Russin's book uses the metaphor of music to help understand how we experience life in general. But what he's saying here is that we have these previous ideas and we join them with the experience that we meet in this moment. And that's part of how we create this melodic flow. And the word melodic is not a mistake there. In music, melody is the thing that kind of winds, and it's not necessarily repetitive. It tells a story, right? So how do we tell a story in our thinking? How do we put things together? So this is where association comes in. We make associations. Memory, this is where imagination, creativity comes in. So in the class, both in our movement practice and also we're going to use a kind of a word association idea. We're going to notice how is it that one thought leads to another. So we're going to literally explore the pathways of thought. And of course, there are really an infinite number of ways that we could carve our thoughts through a particular experience. But again, how do we decide for ourselves to take this path or to take that path? And so this too is not just something up here in the head. This is really something that happens throughout the body. So, so that's what we'll be looking at in the second class in the series. The third class in the series on January 19 is called Abandoning Control and Allowing What Is. So the first quotation that we are going to use is from Heinrich Jacobi again. He says, "Go ahead and do things wrong. I mean that very seriously. We are brought up to have a real fear of doing things wrong, and this is one of the things that does the most to cheat us out of life." So when we were talking before about this idea that we encounter the now with our previous ideas, one of the large categories of ideas that we tend to bring with us is this idea of what is right and what is wrong. Now, in our lives, some things might feel very much like they are right, and other things might feel that very much they are wrong. But if you stop to think about it, there may be things that felt wrong to you in the past which don't feel that way anymore. And so there's obviously a sense that right and wrong are relative, or they're up to the individual. I don't mean that we can just make up anything, but how do we decide? And then once we have decided that something is right or wrong, what's important to realize, and what Jacobi is pointing out, is that it can be a real limitation. And so maybe we have an idea of something that is wrong, but we could still go ahead and explore something that we consider to be wrong, because there might be information in it that is really valuable. And he puts it pretty strongly. He says, if we don't do that, it cheats us out of life. So the next quotation that we have comes from Susan Campbell. "We need to learn to tolerate that uncomfortable in-between part of any interaction, that stage of not knowing that which cannot yet be known, but may become known in the next moment if you can stop trying to control things and stay open." So Susan Campbell is talking about something that grows out of the same thing that Jacobi was talking about. Because if we don't know the answer, we can short circuit ourselves by thinking, as we're exploring, well, wait, what I'm doing now seems wrong, so this can't be it, and let me just sort of back off. And of course, that place where we think we might be wrong, or we simply don't know what it is that we're looking for, that's right, it's confusion, quite simply. So how do we show up in that moment of confusion? Do we go into anxiety, or can we actually remain curious? Now, new experiences, often there's just an unavoidable anxiety that is part of that. But it's one thing to feel that and kind of run away, or know how to self-regulate to the degree that you can kind of hang out with the anxiety for a little while, and maybe by doing so, get to a point where something gets clarified and you can move forward. So again, the way we short circuit ourselves is to just try to control everything. It's got to be a certain way. And then sometimes we just have to abandon that control. And although that can be scary, it's often what actually leads to the forward motion that we ultimately want. So as always in the class, we will create a metaphor in the body for this. We'll explore this idea through movement. We'll actually be looking at what happens when we move to the left and move to the right. And for just about everyone, the way you move to the left is not the mirror image of how you move to the right. And so first there's a process of discovering that. And then if we try to move to the right the way we move to the left, or try to move to the left the way we move to the right, for most people, we're going to encounter that feeling of this doesn't work, or this feels wrong, right? But there's an infinite number of ways to move to the left and move to the right. So we ought to be able to take what we did to the one side to the other, but we tend to have to confront this confusion. We have to go through a little bit of this anxiety. So I think that's going to be a very interesting and concrete way to experience this whole question of letting go of trying to control everything. One last quotation here. Once the structure of our belief system is no longer there, we become very flexible. We can create anything we want to create. We can do anything we want to do. So that sounds pretty great, right? But it requires moving past that sense of clinging on to what we have previously believed. Doesn't mean we have to throw out everything we've believed, but I think he's talking about the capacity to show up, as he says, flexibly, so that even though I might believe something to be true, I can let it go in the moment in order to potentially learn something new. And then if I do learn something that in fact seems more valid than what I previously believed, I can recognize that and be open. I can be flexible enough to change my belief. Okay, so the last class in the series on January 26 is about attention, intention, action, and distraction. We cannot teach anything if we don't have someone's attention. We cannot learn anything if we don't pay attention. So that, again, from Don Miguel Ruiz, I think that's pretty clear. I don't think I need to add much to that, but let's see what else comes along with it. Eckhart Tolle. Instead of mentally projecting yourself away from the now, go more deeply into the now by going more deeply into your body. And finally, Helen Keller again. The silent worker is imagination, which decrees reality out of chaos. So the basic question in this last class is, how do we take intention and turn it into action? And not only just doing that, but how do we do it with high quality result? How does the action actually reflect the intention? It really results in the thing that we were after, right? And so intention and action, and then the other two words in the title of the class were attention and distraction, which you can think of basically as being opposites, right? But how important is it to pay attention in our world of today? How much distraction do we all face, right? It's constant. You're invited to distraction every time you look at one of these screens, and you might pick up your phone to text somebody, and before you get to it, you're seeing headlines of what's going on in the world and all of the rest, right? So sometimes just the discipline to stay focused on the thing that you are doing is no small feat, and it requires practice to cultivate that kind of attention. Now, another connecting idea between attention, intention, action, and distraction is imagination. And one view of the imagination is just like making up fantastical ideas in your head. I imagine that I can fly, blah, blah, blah. But another version, some people use the term imaginal, is about imagining something that you know is real, like imagining a movement that you know how to make, or using an image, a specific image, to help direct your movement in a very specific way. And this can be very powerful. And it's a particular form of using your attention and bridging between intention and action. Again, it's something that requires practice to do well, but it's one of the most valuable tools that you could have in daily life, because how many times are you going to be doing something that you want to turn out well, right? So being able to create an image of your action and then use that to organize the action itself is a vital skill. So this gives you some sense of the many different ways that your thinking and your movement and your action are all woven together. And again, if you'd like to explore those things directly with a group of like-minded folks through the practice of awareness through movement, as well as through open dialogue and exchange, doing different kinds of experiments, sharing our experience together, that's what we'll be up to in the Expand Your World community practice sessions this month, as we explore the movement of thoughts and attention. So thanks for listening, and see you soon.